On the 29th of August, when we were married, the day dawned hot, hot, hot and humid. And there was no air conditioning in those days. And I had chosen a satin wedding gown with long sleeves, thinking it was an autumn wedding, which it was more or less. I had a headpiece that I borrowed from my girlfriend's sister because headpieces were expensive. My older sister who attended me, had an ice blue satin dress, same design as the bride, and she had a halo of flowers in her hair. And we had a rehearsal the day before, but I guess I was very nervous because after the ceremony was over and she was holding my bouquet during part of the ceremony, I started back up the aisle at the recessional, and she still had my bouquet, and she's hard of hearing, and so instead of whispering softly, she said, and I took my bouquet. That was a vivid memory to me, and I think you can tell them about our soloist.
Oh, at the ceremony, we had Earl Conway sing for us, and Earl Conway's the friend who worked at Republic Steel with me, and also the one we worked together with at the War Department. He was into music and always wanted to become famous as a singer or orchestra leader. But even till this date, he does have a small orchestra, and they play in local places. He sang at our wedding, and as far as my dress is concerned, I got a suit with sort of a pinstripe in it, and I was very proper to have a shirt that with the cuffs long enough to be about a half-inch longer than the jacket sleeves, because that was the proper way to wear a shirt with cufflinks. When we went to have our photographs taken, the photographer, not knowing Bo Brummel, decided to ink out the sleeves below the cuffs, below the cuff line of the jacket. So our wedding photo does show my jacket without the proper sleeve showing outside the jacket.
It was a small wedding, just very close friends and relatives, and Mike's parents were absent from the wedding because not that they didn't approve of the marriage, but I think because they were very shy people, reticent people, and they didn't understand the Protestant church, and they were no longer members of the Orthodox Church, and so I guess for various reasons like that, the only one in Mike's family that attended was his sister. And I had a close friend, Rita Chatlis. Her name was Rita Shanahan at the time, and she's now the wife of Mike's close friend, Andy. And she didn't come in the church because at that time Catholics didn't enter Protestant churches. So those were just two, what I look upon as blemishes. But and then my mother had the reception at our home, and it was hot in the house, and all those people in our house.
Well, as far as the ceremony is concerned, Andy Chatlis, with whom I'd gone through grammar school and high school with, and had played in various athletic games in the school playground and otherwise, he was my best man. Both my brothers were in service at the time, so they were not available. At that time, Joe was in Washington with the Coast Artillery, and Corky was in the Navy. So it was a wartime situation where you relied on those who were available to
That's right.
join you.
Yeah. In fact, my sister Vera was married 2 years later, and she had such a conglomerate of attendants because you just took whoever happened to be home. Maybe not your closest friends, but Andy was always Mike's closest friend, and Mike still introduces Andy to our friends as this is my best man.
We've maintained our friendship, I guess, from, well, it's been almost as long as we've both been living, almost 70 years. Well,
Yeah.
we live in the same neighborhood, so it's always been a very close association. You know, I'm very happy to have him as my best man, and still am happy to know that we're together.
And then while we were on our honeymoon, Andy had volunteered for the Marine Corps, and he was called. And so by the time we got home from our 10-day honeymoon, Andy was gone.
Well, he was married the following week, but we were off on our honeymoon. Since our country was at war at the time that we were married, there were a lot of restrictions as to what you could or could not buy. And we had a small car, but the tires were very bad. Earl Conway had a car which had good tires on it, so he allowed me to switch tires from his car onto our car so that we could take our honeymoon trip. We decided that we would go to the Smoky Mountains. It was a place we were very fond of seeing. And so we headed south. That was before the interstates were made. And the trip was very long and the roads very windy. At one point, we were around Jonesboro, I believe it is, or somewhere in Tennessee where the curves are very, very sharp. And one of the new tires blew out, and you just couldn't go to a store and buy a tire at that time. So I think it was in Corbin, Kentucky, we pulled in, and the person at the garage said he could vulcanize a tire, which was a process of sort of welding rubber onto the brake. He did that, and we were able to continue on to the Smoky Mountains, where we spent our honeymoon. For the first 2 nights, we had a tent that we borrowed from Earl Conway's boyfriend. I think it was Bill Purtle, I'm not sure. But we slept in the tent the first night, and in the morning, the raccoons had gotten into our food. Raccoons are bears at the Smoky Mountain campground, and Dolores was too frightened to sleep in the car after that. So I think we sleep in the tent, so we slept in the car after that. And then we continued traveling around the Smoky Mountain area and into North Carolina, and I guess we touched a little bit of Georgia. But that was our honeymoon. The first place we wanted to stop was at Renfrew Valley, Kentucky, because I love to hear the barn dance music from Renfrew Valley. The person that ran the barn dance was John Lair, and he had been at the WLS barn dance for a long time with the Cumberland Ridge Runners. Then he went back to his hometown of Renfrew Valley, and he built a big barn in which he held the performances every Saturday night. And they built cute little cottages, little things, individual cottages, in which there was a bed and a sink and a bathroom, but quite primitive. And in the cottage, the wood trim was wormy chestnut. And that becomes very important because when we finally built our home in South Holland, I insisted on having wormy chestnut beams, and it was so hard to find, but that's where I got the idea of it. We had cottage number 6 at the Renfrew Valley, and we've gone back to Renfrew Valley a number of times just to recall our experiences down there. It's beautiful territory. It's especially beautiful when the dogwood and the red bud are both in bloom. And those are things we've been always remembering.
I was so proud that Mike planned the whole thing. But he had been such a radio fan of Renfrew Valley. And it was spring to him when the redbuds, when this man, what was his name?
John Lair.
John Lair would announce on radio, well, the redbuds are coming out now, and spring isn't far behind, and it would be winter in Chicago. We thought that was so far south. We really thought that was a long way south. And so he had planned the whole honeymoon. The first night of our honeymoon we spent in, and I can't remember the name of the town.
Kentland, Indiana.
Kentland, Indiana. That was, today is a hop, skip, and a jump, but after the wedding and the reception, and I was tired. I was worn out, and I think I slept all the way to Kentland. And it was a tiny hotel. And at that time, there was a song that was popular. It was called "In a Small Hotel with a Wishing Well," and that always signified that song always signified that little hotel. And we used to go back and look at that little hotel once in a while.
We'd stop by, if nothing else, we'd have lunch at the local restaurant, which is still there. What is it, No Not or something?
It's a funny name for a restaurant.
Yeah.
Well, outside of that and the incident with the bears or whatever it was, I was not a camper, and Mike liked high adventure. I remember there were the Smoky Mountains had just recently been opened as a national park, and so there were still old Kentucky people living in there, Tennessee people, and they had their little homesteads, and they sold canned goods and quilts and things like that to the tourists. And we've been back to the Smoky Mountains, I'd say 10 or 15 times. Took Birch there one year, and it's so changed and so crowded now. When we were there on our honeymoon and being in a tent, there was a nice rocky stream and where the water was a little deeper, and we hopped in our bathing suits and took a bath and shampooed our hair in there, which you wouldn't dare to do today.
Actually, the spot was called the old swimming hole, right?
It was.
Right after
Still
you
is.
just went a little south out of Gatlinburg. But they changed all that, and they don't allow swimming. And it's so much of it has changed. Yeah. And speaking of the Smokies, one of my best recollections is when Mike and I were able to climb to the top of Mount LeConte, which was quite an ordeal, and that was only about, I think, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. We were able to do that. So I always feel real good that I finally conquered Mount LeConte. Dolores and I have tried several times.
Yeah, we only got halfway.
Got a part way.
I was going to go home and lose 40 pounds and be able to get to the top, but I never did. Story of my life.
When after our honeymoon, we had already arranged to rent a small apartment on the northeast corner of 103rd and Calumet Avenue in Chicago on the south side. And we fixed it up. Dolores has always been one to make a beautiful home out of whatever it was. We had some bits and pieces of some new furniture we bought, not a great deal, but enough to occupy the small apartment.
Well, your mom and dad gave us a maple dinette set, which was gorgeous to us. That was for our wedding gift. And we'd gone to Montgomery Ward's and bought a couch and chair. And there was a Murphy bed that went up into the wall in a closet. That was the bedroom. It had a nice bathroom. Nice. But it was over a grocery store. And we had a little problem with cockroaches.
I think that was because they were excavating 103rd Street. There was a problem throughout the area at that time. Yeah. So we were only there, I think it was 6 months when I left for the service. And so that was our first apartment. And thereafter, various Army camps were the places I would live, and sometimes Dolores would also live with us. We'd both find a place whenever we could.
So you weren't with him the whole time? You had to stay home?
No, I stayed home and worked, and in the meantime, Pullman Standard had stopped manufacturing railroad cars and started manufacturing riveting parts of airplanes, and subsequently they were making landing craft. And they had opened up a whole new plant from the car building plant that I worked at. And so our payroll system increased, and finally so many of the men were taken off into the service that I was running the whole payroll operation. And I wanted to be with Mike, but when he was in boot camp, or what, basic training, I guess they called it, he couldn't be off the base. And that's when he was in Biloxi, Mississippi. And so I did go down for a weekend, and that was a big thing for me because I had never traveled by myself, never been on a train by myself. And so I bought a new dress. It was only going to be for a weekend. And he was going to meet me in New Orleans. And he had a room in the hotel. And I had to transfer trains. And Mike always has to help me because it was at Memphis.
Memphis, right.
And I didn't know about separation of the races. And the trains and depots were so crowded in those days. And I got off the train, and I'm used to always helping myself. And I saw, oh, there's a room over there that's almost empty. So I went and sat in there until a white man came and got me out. He said, you don't belong there. That's just for niggers. And I don't think we knew any black people. They were people to me. Well, anyway, I got there, and Mike had work good for me. We didn't have any money, you have to understand. And he was on a private salary. Well, then when he was transferred, to back up, they had testing to see what you were qualified for as far as training. And he volunteered for radio school because the radio school at that time was in the Stevens Hotel in Chicago on Michigan Boulevard, and he thought he'd be home for his training, only to realize that they put him on a train. And they used to do things like they're going to ship you to a cold area, but they tell you to wear your summer gear, so you wouldn't know where the train was going because that would be classified. And kept going, and finally ended up in cold Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Well, you forgot to tell him that when you came to visit me in New Orleans, we were just in this wealthy situation that we decided we would eat at Antoine's, and with my big army boots and everything on, and I think it took every penny. I had the return ticket on the train that I did have from New Orleans to Biloxi, but I think every other penny I had was the last penny we used to leave a tip.
Oh, and then we even went into the Court of the Two Sisters, which
yeah.
was very exclusive.
Yeah.
And all the other men were officers, but whatever money we had, we always treated ourselves real well.
I didn't choose to go to the radio school. They would give you aptitude tests, and they felt I was qualified for that branch. And the tests were given at Biloxi, Mississippi, to see where they would send you. And I qualified for the radio school, and I was very happy because the possibility was that I would go to the Stevens Hotel, which is now the Hilton on Michigan Avenue. That was one of the main places they were sending radio operators and mechanic students. However, during basic training at the base, we were practicing what they called invasion or landing techniques in an invasion. And during the time when all of us were pretending like we're landing on a beach, one of the soldiers landed right on the side of my left leg and injured it badly, and I ended up in a hospital. And I was in there for several weeks. And during the course of that stay, I was on the list to be shipped to the Stevens Hotel in Chicago, but since I was in a hospital, I had to miss that. And by the time I was back on duty, the next shipment came, and the shipment there was, again, we didn't know where we were going. We're on a train, and off we go, and end up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which was I think it was called Pneumonia Gulch at that time. They claimed the winters were 40 degrees below zero, and it was rather desolate, mostly farmlands all around there. And that's where I went for my training as a radio operator mechanic. I guess unfortunately there too, I was qualified to go to officers training school, and getting back to Pneumonia Gulch, I developed pneumonia, landed in the base hospital, and was very, very seriously ill. In fact, they called Dolores and my parents to come and see me. Well,
As fast as we could get there, and as fast as you could get there was on a train, and overnight on the train. And so Mike's mom and dad and I got on the Milwaukee Road, and not knowing if he was going to be dead or alive when we got there. It was a terrible situation, really.
they had no medication for it at that
No,
time. They
well, there were
just
no
started
miracle
to
drugs.
develop sulfa drugs. And fortunately, I was put on it, and I had a Dr. Brownell from LaGrange, Georgia, that was just a very, very good doctor. He was able to get me back on my feet, but I was in the hospital for about 90 days.
Oh, yeah.
And during that time, the shipment to Yale University for Officers Training School had my name on it, but I was in a hospital, and that's how I never became an officer.
Anything but a
Yeah.
PFC.
And then I was assigned as an instructor at the school facility, and then that's when Dolores decided to join me
I
there.
decided to move up there.
Yeah.
So I went to my boss, and I can look at it from his perspective now, but at that time I couldn't. And I said, I'm going to have to give you a notice because I'm going to move to where my husband is stationed. And he said, you're a Bolshevik. He just put me down. He made me feel so terrible for deserting the war effort, you see. And but I went, and I got off the train, and he was in the hospital, so he couldn't meet me. And the USO was always stationed in all the railway stations, and they helped me to find a room for that night, which was in a private home. And then I guess I couldn't afford that. A lot of the people there opened up their homes to GI's wives because this was a very poor area, and a chance to make money was wonderful to the natives there. So the next place I found to live was a room on top of a funeral home. But to get to my room, I had to go through the casket showroom, which was a little spooky. I'd come home late from the hospital on the bus. The bus driver in that little town was so nice. He would go off his route and leave me right in front of the door because their town had changed so much. When you start loading up with GIs in a place like that, they weren't used to crime, but they were getting it. And the bus driver would leave me off at the door, and snow, 2 feet deep. It was really terrible. And I found a job in a Episcopalian school for girls. The church ran a rather large school. A lot of Native American students that they took, that they were trying to educate into Episcopalianism, I guess. And I worked there as a secretary and lived. Then I found another little room near the school until Mike got out of the hospital.
And then I was assigned as an instructor, and as an instructor we were allowed to live off base. Mm-hmm. So the two of us found a little apartment at 1001 and a half South 2nd Street, I guess it was, above the Jacobsons. And it was a cute little place. And
They were very nice people.
We were there probably for a year and a half, until, again, I was going to be shipped out.
Well, it was the Battle of the Bulge then.
And they had just developed the new system for guiding aircraft to land, in bad weather. And it was a system at the end of runways, and they call it ground control approach. You could guide the airplanes in. And I was sent to Columbia Army Air Force Base. No, first I went to Fort Dix for training for that. At the Fort Dix Air Base, which adjoined the Fort Dix Army installation. And from there, I was shipped to Columbia, South Carolina, where we were going to prepare to go overseas. And it was there that my left knee, well, I always was having problems with it after that incident, and doing the best I could to get along on it. But we had an officer, a commander, that I think his name was Roland Beatty, as I recall. He just Captain Beatty, just loved parades. And whenever some dignitaries would come in, he'd always have a big parade and a review. And I remember a review for General George Marshall was one of them. And then we were having a parade one day, and an important general noticed me marching with a limp, and he called me aside. He said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "Well, I have a bad knee." He says, "Well, you get over to the hospital if you have a bad knee. Don't be parading with your bad knee." So I went to the hospital, and they x-rayed and all those things, and a doctor, I recall his name being Dr. Tortoro, explained how bad the situation was. And this was now it's getting close to July of 45, and I was in the Sioux Falls Hospital, or the Columbia, South Carolina Hospital for, I guess it was a couple months. There was no real quick remedy for knees at that time. They did perform surgery, but the results were usually very poor. You'd end up with a leg that was stiff, and that alternative didn't appeal to me. So no one insisted that I have that surgery done. And finally, the doctor said, "Well, we can't do much for you, sir. We're going to have to discharge you." And I didn't let Dolores know about this until I just said I was coming home, and she thought I was coming home for a visit. And I was discharged about toward the end of July. This was already after the end of the war in Europe, because we both remember when the war ended in Europe. Dolores and I were living in near Fort Dix at Wrightstown in an old farmhouse. So we were able to take the train from, I think it was from Trenton to New York City, and we actually went into Times Square at the time of the victory in Europe. Now it was close to the end of the war in Japan, but I was discharged in July of 45.
Or he would have been sent to them.
Yeah, we were preparing to go
Japanese
overseas.
theater.
Yeah.
After I stopped working, after you got out of the hospital in Sioux Falls, I needed to make more money. We wanted to rent an apartment rather than a room. So I went out to the base and looked for a job at the air base where most of the girls were working. I only made $14 a week at the Episcopalian School for Girls. And but it was a genteel job. But I went out to the base and I thought, well, I'm going to ask what pays the most. And they said, with the Battle of the Bulge going on, they were sending all the GIs overseas. We could use people in the motor pool. Can you drive? Well, yes, I could drive, but I didn't tell them not much. So they start you out on a staff car. And to make a long story short, I moved up through delivery trucks and Jeeps, and finally a garbage truck, and then they sent me out on a troop transport truck to take the guys out to the rifle range. And the anecdote, I remember the orderly that was in Mike's ward at the hospital, forget his name, But
Bill Buhner.
Bill Buhner, yeah, and he was on that particular load of GIs going out to the rifle range, and he said, "You're driving us," and it was hilly and deep snow, and I didn't know. I could double clutch, and look at the nomenclature on the dashboard and maybe figure out how to shift, but this thing, I mean, it had a zigzag like went on forever. And so I thought, well, I'll stick it in low gear. And I drove all the way to the rifle range, and this Bill Gunner is on the back of the truck saying, "Send me to France, send me anyplace, get me off here," which helped, of course. Then when we got out to Fort Dix, they put me on an ambulance, and at that time I had just become pregnant with Marcia, and it was leather lined, and the smell of that leather when you had morning sickness was, I was so sick. And so I decided to go home. My mother had rented the upstairs apartment of her building to my sister Vera, so again Vera and I became roommates. and and so then this was August that Mike was speaking about, of being on our medical discharge from the Air Corps. And I thought he was coming on furlough, and I went to the railroad station to pick him up, and he said, "I'm home for good." And I thought, oh, what, all my prayers are answered, because it wasn't pleasant living with my sister and expecting a baby and wondering how in the world am I going to take care of this baby, because I was trying to work up until the last minute, but in those days they wouldn't hire a pregnant woman. So I went to 63rd and Halsted, and there was a Hillman's, which was kind of a deli store, and got a job as a cashier there. They didn't require a physical, and when they said, "Are you pregnant?" I said no, because I had to work. And I had to not only make change, but you had to make change from books. For red meat, you had to have stamps, and for everything you bought, you had to have stamps. And then when I could no longer work, I stayed home. So it was such a blessing that he was discharged. When Marcia came, he was home. It was wonderful. And we lived in that apartment. Then Vera, in the meanwhile, moved into an apartment at her mother-in-law's building. Ross was, I think, still in the Air Corps at that time, her husband. And so that's how we started out our married life.
Yep.
Basically, because that was almost like a first apartment.
You were living up above your parents' home then when Marcia was born? Is
Yeah.
that where you were?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
And
We lived at a 106 West 110th place when Marsh was born, in the upstairs
Chicago.
apartment in Chicago. Marsh was born at Lying Hospital, and I think at that time the full charge, there was no charge because I was in service at the time, so there was no charge for the hospital or doctor. That was covered for GIs.
We got all our medical free on the Army base, but even when you weren't on the Army base, the Army allowed you the money to cover and you had no health insurance in those days.
I think Sandra's bill was $80, wasn't it?
Yeah, something
for the entire thing. So
unbelievable.
how things have changed.
you were discharged before Marcia was born.
She was born in December. Yeah.
Marsh was born December 16th of 45. I was discharged late in July of 45. So I was at home. I went back to work for the War Department, but not immediately. I was on what they called 5250. It was $52 a month for 50 weeks, I think. Until I went to work for the War Department, we were just barely getting by with what we had. After the war was over, because it was over the next month after I was discharged, the process was beginning to assemble all the war industry things and just to prepare them for storage. And I went to work for the War Assets Administration in assembling all these items, inspecting them, and inventorying them. And I worked with them for I guess it was a year or two or so. And when that job gave out, that was that was in 47 already, and that's when we had to make some decisions about our life and my career. And
And he
talking.
came home and announced to me, I think I'm going to go to school. And I thought, oh God, we just about got started again, and how are we going to live? Well, to back up though, I did want to say that before he was released from the service, I didn't know how I was going to find clothes for this new baby because there was no cotton on the market. The war effort had taken all the cotton, and there was just nothing that you could buy for baby clothes and diapers. My mother and I used to search for flannel material to hem to make diapers. And one morning I saw in the Tribune an ad that Marshall Fields and the Loop was going to have, that's the only place they were at those days, was in the Loop, was going to have diapers, bird's eye diapers. And so I got on the bus real early in the morning, very pregnant, and went and stood in line outside the store because the first ones in was the same with nylon hose. The first ones there would get the merchandise, like Russia. While I was waiting outside the store to get in, there was a newsstand on the corner, and they started announcing the headlines. We had hit Nagasaki. Was it
Hiroshima?
Hiroshima with an atomic bomb, which I had no idea what that was, but the news was very good. Now the war with the Japanese would be over. This is wonderful. I'm going to get diapers. The war's going to be over. Things are looking up. And of course, Mike was home then when the baby was born. And I came home on Christmas Eve from the hospital. In those days, they kept you for 10 days. So Marcia was such a prize. Oh, she was such a prize. I would dress her in little cute little things and tie ribbons on her wrist and in her hair for when Daddy came home from work, and she would meet him at the door. I always taught the kids to love their father, and not that they wouldn't if I hadn't taught them, but I made a special thing out of it. And then when we were living, my parents sold that building, and we had to move. And so we found an apartment down the street from Mike's parents with the Red Vey family. They were Hungarian. And we had a little apartment there. And then Mike announced he wanted to go to school. And so we had to move in with your parents, I guess.
Yeah,
because we couldn't afford the rent.
When I did go to school, they did allow, there was a subsistence allowance they gave in addition to paying the tuition. They gave a subsistence allowance, and together with that and my working as a laborer, we were able to get by. But we did move in with my parents for a while, and then Dolores found that there was going to be an opening in some on-campus housing for veterans. What they had done is they took some old barracks and put them on the campus, and they used that for housing for the veterans that were going to school. And she was able to sign up for an apartment, and one became available. And so we moved into the apartment right across the street from Roby House, just around the corner from Rockefeller Chapel. Very convenient to school. You could walk over there, so it was a great help. And there was some construction in the area. One of the jobs I worked on was a library center on the University of Chicago. I worked for Sumner Solid on that, so it was very convenient. You could walk over there. And I do recall,
To back up, To back up a little bit, when we were living with Mike's folks, then Grandma would take care of the baby and I could go to work. And there was a manufacturing company called Burson All Steel Press that was half block from where they lived. I went over just off the street. They didn't advertise or anything. And I went into the personnel office, and Alice Wing was the personnel person. And I said, I would like to work here because I told her our situation. I would be close to the baby. And she said, can you drive a car? And I said, oh, I have a I could drive trucks. I have a chauffeur's license. And she said, well, we have two what they called hot cars. And we are looking for someone to drive. We've always hired a man before. I said, well, I could do that. And they had a Cadillac and another car that they called a baby Cadillac, and that was like a
LaSalle.
LaSalle.
Yeah.
They don't make that car. They haven't made that car in many years. And either one of those cars, they would call into personnel. I would sit there and help her with the timekeeping, which I had experience in, and they'd call and say, "We got a hot job. Got to go pick up a belt for the machine," and it would entail going into Chicago into some manufacturing places along the Chicago River, and I hate to tell you how many times I got lost because my mind goes north and south and east and west, and some of these streets were skew streets, and then I'd have to go to Midway Airport. We didn't have O'Hare Airport yet, and I would have to pick up their customers and bring them to the plant. They gave their customers a lot of good service, and they had a lot of war contracts. They had been two Jewish brothers who had actually had a junkyard and parlayed it into this during because of the war into this rather large manufacturing. They made presses, but they were one of the forerunners of making presses out of all steel. And I would go to the hotels down the loop and bring their customers back to the plant. And but then when we moved to the barracks on campus, I had a job in the personnel office there in the administration building, so I could walk to work. And then my dad hired Mike part-time on this library and whatever building he was building.
Well, when I was trying to mention before, I was starting to break up, but I remember I was digging a ditch along the sidewalk, and you came by with Marcia.
With the baby buggy.
She felt so badly about it.
You felt bad because he was digging a ditch?
I felt bad because he had to work like that.
Oh. Well, how old was Marcia then?
Well, see, she was born in December, and I think you went to school the following.
I started in October of 47.
47. So she was year and a half. And then when she got to be 2, we sent her to nursery school. And they said, oh, she's still in diapers. We can't take her. But the one woman in the school was so nice. And she said, I'll take care of her. And
I think it was Miss Lois, wasn't it?
Miss Lois. And Marcia loved Miss Lois. Miss Lois carried her. And in the meanwhile, we potty trained her. And she hated that nursery school. She just hated it. She hated to have to go. And I hated to be working and be out on the streets and see other ladies pushing their baby buggies, and I had to work, and I resented it. But we made it.
We made it. We loved our little apartment. It was, again, another place that Dolores made a lovely home out of. It had an ice box. You had to keep emptying the water. You had to go out around the back and hang your clothes on a line, or you'd go out.
Crawl out the back window.
And down the emergency stair.
And we had a shower that was made out of metal, and we'd have to push Marcia in that shower and all that noise.
But it was
oil
cozy.
Stove to heat with.
And it was a kerosene fuel oil stove.
Oh, we loved that little apartment.
But we were in our own little place. And we stayed there until I finished college and law school both, and stayed until late in 1952 when we moved to Springfield, Illinois. During the time we lived at the barracks, Sandra was born. So there were two of them there. And Sandra was born before I graduated law school. And so the four of us moved to Springfield on Milton Street on the far west side of Springfield. We had rented a house. I expected to get a job with the state government, but the political clouds weren't working the way they had promised they would work. So we were very, very bad off at that time. And I decided to apply for a job with State Farm Insurance. So I took a job with them in their main office in Bloomington, Illinois. I went to school there. So I drove back and forth from Springfield to Bloomington.
Yeah, so we were alone in Springfield. But when Sandra was born, Sandra was maybe only 6 months old, and Mike was taking his finals for law school. We worked day and night, didn't we, Mike? I would type, he would dictate his papers, and I would type. And
it was
one night we didn't go to bed at all.
I would, in order to prepare the necessary papers, I'd have to do the research, write it all out. Dolores would type it out. Then we'd have to clip, paste, and put it into a form. Then she'd have to type it in the final form. And sometimes it was all night long she was up typing.
But the blessing was that Sandra was the most wonderful, relaxed baby. And we had about 10 pacifiers. We'd stick them in her crib, and she had to take care of herself. We just didn't have time. And if one would drop out the crib, she'd just reach over, another one stick it in her mouth.
In addition to all the ordeals we had to go through, there were some very exciting times in University of Chicago, because when I graduated college, we had the cap and gown, and the ceremonies are always held at the Rockefeller Memorial Chapel, and it's very dignified. And at the time I graduated college, we had Marcia, so some of the photos of my graduation are with Marcia and Dolores. I felt very, very happy to complete college in a quick fashion.
At the ceremony, I took Marcia up to the balcony because I didn't want her to disturb this distinguished processional, and she saw her daddy and among all these people, and she said, "Hi, Daddy."
Wow.
And then by the time he graduated from law school, Marcia was graduating from kindergarten at the same time.
She went to race school at that time. Likewise, it was a very lovely ceremony. I think somebody else came over to the ceremony.
My family came, your sister, I think.
Yeah, and
It was quite an achievement.
My Doctor of Law degree, which was in June of 52, although I'd finished all my work in March of 52, I finished all my classes. I just stayed on so we could keep our barracks home, and next so that I could attend the convocation in June. And then they allowed us to stay just a few months longer, but then we did have to find some place, and that's when we decided.
But he was a whiz kid. He went through college and law school in 4 years? Or?
Well, it was from October of 47 to March of 52, so it's about 4.5 years, and I got both the bachelor's degree and the Doctor of Law degree. And then I passed the bar at the same time. I passed the Illinois State Bar exam in the first try, which was very unusual. University of Chicago is a very nice school, but they don't prepare you for things like the bar exam. It's highly theoretical in many ways. So if you're going to take the bar exam, you have to take a bar review course, which I took, and I'm very happy I did. I don't know how I would have known what form of questions would be asked on a bar exam if I didn't take that. It was a situation where of the percentage of University of Chicago graduates who passed the bar on the first try was very small. So unless you did take the bar review course, it was going to be a tough thing. I was very happy. I took the course, took the exam, passed the exam, and I remember during taking the exam, it was given at Northwestern University, and there were segments of courses that you were being examined on, and you're cramming and cramming and cramming for each of these courses. First, you don't know which one, and you get one. As soon as you finish that one, you just quickly discharge all those papers and thoughts about that subject from your mind, went on to the next one, concentrated on all those courses. As soon as that was over, you took that out of your mind, and the next afternoon there was another one, and you kept this on. Finally, you completed them all and just hoped and prayed that the right result would come in. And in my case, it did, and I was very, very happy about it.
So, were your parents at the ceremony? Both your parents?
I don't recall if my parents came to the ceremony that I remember.
Mike's parents weren't. They were very reticent, and they did everything for us. They just did everything for us. When he was going to school, they'd come to our apartment with meat and groceries, and they helped to the greatest extent that they could. They were wonderful to us. They were not socially inclined, and so they did not come to the ceremonies, but they were very extremely proud of them.
Just on that subject, my mother and dad were very great at giving parties. They always wanted to have big occasions at their house, and they were very lively parties. But if my parents were invited to somebody else's party, they would almost never go. It was just like they're great givers of parties, but they didn't have the social inclination to go to other
But you know,
affairs.
the few times I saw your mother dressed up when she did go to a party or a wedding, she was so cute because she would go in her jewelry box and put rings on, and she'd tie a little chiffon scarf around her neck.
Well, she was very concerned about her appearance all the time.
She was a very pretty lady when she was young, a tiny little thing with a tiny little waist. But she took on a lot of weight because she was an excellent cook for one reason, and she worked very hard all her life, and so she aged at a young age. But they couldn't have been nicer to us, and they loved the children. Mike's mom called Marsha Marushka, and Sandra what was Sandra?
Sandichka.
Sandichka.
Yeah. But they loved them, and they would love to play with them and try to tell them things, like Ukrainian little sayings, and
She sang
them.
lullabies to them. She would put them when they were babies. She'd put them on a pillow, and she'd sing. What was it? It was like Turalura Lura, but it would.
Lura or something like
Yeah.
that sort. Some Ukrainian
And she
thing
would
that,
rock them, and she had a lot of grandchildren.
my dad, but they were both very, very generous. Let's say they had nothing, that they gave you everything they had, plus
What they
what
didn't,
they didn't
have.
have. And that was true all their life. Ceremony-wise, they weren't very outgoing, but they were very close to the family and loved everyone. We moved from the barracks at the University of Chicago probably September of 1952. And at that time, Sandra would have been just a year and a half, I believe. Let's see, she was born in April, just about a year and a half. And Marcia in 52 was about 7, not quite 7.
She was in first grade.
When we moved to Springfield. And Pleasant Hill School, I guess, in Springfield is where she went.
We were kind of on the outskirts of Springfield, and there were cornfields surrounding us, and
The store on the corner had dirt floor.
Yeah.
Wheeler's grocery store.
It was a nice
Very,
bungalow
very
we lived in,
rural.
but it was kind of a poor neighborhood.
And we kept the bungalow up again, what little we had. I recall when we moved from Aurora to the barracks, I think that's where we moved, from Aurora to the barracks, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, we had lived with my parents
For just a little bit.
Yeah.
our possessions all fit in our car. So that's what we owned at that time.
But when we moved to Springfield, we had to have a moving, and it was a friend of yours who had a truck.
You know, I think we did have that sewing machine from Sears. Wasn't it from Sears, the maple one? But we were able to pack everything we owned into a car, and that's one of our moves. In Springfield, we had a nice home. It was nice when we moved in, and much, much nicer by the time we moved out. We maintained the lawn. It was just kept immaculately. We worked hard, and Dolores had the inside looking lovely. Yep, our friends from Chicago would visit us, especially during the state fair time, and it was pleasant, but it was very, very poor because I wasn't working, and just looking and hoping and trusting, and finally I did get the job with State Farm, which was the first real income we had for quite a number of years.
But we noticed when we were living there that Sandy's character was developing. She became Marcia's boss. She was 1.5, and Marcia was close to 7, and she would she couldn't play out with the children because there were no fences around the yard. But she would stand in the screen door, and I'd have it hooked so she couldn't get out, and she'd stand there, and she couldn't even say Marcia. She would say Shasha, Shasha, hat. In other words, come in and put your hat on. She was Marcia's. She still is. She still tries to boss Marcia.
Oh, the next door neighbor to us in Springfield was a relative of Errol Conway's brother-in-law.
So it turned out.
It just was coincidental.
But we didn't live there. I think 6
about
months.
6 months. And what happened after I worked for State Farm in Bloomington, they were assigning the adjusters, and they only hired attorneys as adjusters at that time. They were assigning adjusters to various territories, and I was assigned to Cook County. Cook County always needed adjusters, so there was an opening there, and I was assigned to Cook County. And then we moved from Springfield to hometown USIJ, as the kids would call it.
We would sing hometown USA. It was a little it's in Oak Lawn. It was built for GIs returning, and there were a lot of apartments that you could rent, and then duplexes that you could buy. But Mike found he was up in the area first, and so he found a duplex that we could rent 1/2 of it, and it had like a big sign on the corner where you went into the subdivision, and it said hometown USA. So we always would sing when we would come in there with the car, hometown USA, and Sandy would be in the back seat singing hometown USIJ. And she was I think she had her 2nd birthday there.
We were in hometown, I would guess, a little over a year.
The people that rented us the duplex then wanted back in it themselves, and we moved into one of the apartments for very short.
There were apartments, and it was one of those cases where the apartments were all identical. And I came home from work one night, and thinking I was going into our apartment, all the doors up the stairs were all the same. I opened the door, and here I opened the door into the wrong apartment. Had to excuse myself, but it was just like anything else. Everything looked the same at that
The other
time.
incident I remember is people were always moving in and out of those apartments. There was always moving vans around there. And I missed Sandy one day. By that time, she was able to go out by herself, and I finally, the neighbors helped me. We were desperate. She was inside a moving van. She'd run up the ramp and have a gay old time, bouncing around on the furniture. But then we couldn't live in that apartment with the 2 kids, so we drove around, and the town of Park Forest had been started. This was a model town at the time, and it was built by the Klutznick brothers, right?
Phil Klutznick, American Community Developers.
And they had developed a lot of apartments, which subsequently Michael lived in. But they were opening a new section, and the homes were very reasonable there. It's called Eastgate, and they were making 1.5 story houses there. And I I don't know if we had enough money for the down payment ourselves or if your family helped us.
Well, it was a very small down payment. The price of the house was $10,800 for the house and lot and everything. So it wasn't that much. And we did get a loan from, was it A.J. Smith or what was it?
I don't even know. We bought it on a
Somewhere.
contract.
Oh, I think we started to buy it on a contract and then switched over to, no, it was always on a contract.
It was, even
Just a
when we
contract
sold
purchase,
it.
so it
Yeah.
wasn't too much required down. And we were just gradually getting better off because I was working for State Farm, and of course, working for them, they provided me with a vehicle. However, I did have to spend many hours out of the house, and
Usually in the evening
Yeah.
when you could find people home.
Dolores will remember, where am I going? I'm going up north. Where am I going?
Out
I'm going
west.
south. I got to go out west, it
Well,
was
this will be a big help if you don't come home and the police will say, "Well, where was he headed for? West."
Yeah.
So I had a lot of training to do. This
Well,
independent man here.
the first office that I worked from was in the Loop, and so I had to be in the Loop just about every day. And from there, I'd go out to various cases. I worked for, I think, about 13 different State Farm agents handling all their claims of
Sometimes
injuries
not
and so
nice
forth.
neighborhoods, and it was a concern.
Yes, it was. I had to go in very bad neighborhoods, and I suppose, well, you realize it's bad, but you realize, well, that's what has to be done, and we did it. It was working for State Farm that I realized how phony that accident business was. You'd meet people who had been told where to go and what to do, what to say. And it all wasn't true. When you found out that it wasn't true, you'd explain it to your supervisors, and the supervisor would say, "What can we do? It'll cost us more money to try to beat this than we can settle it for." And you'd sort of throw up your hands and just try to dispose of your cases. Even though you didn't feel it was justified, you knew the supervisor wanted them disposed of.
But you learned a lot for your law
It was a great training experience for the branch of law that I finally went into, which was primarily personal injury work. You learn the insurance company side of it, and it was so helpful to know their theory and their strategy and how they were going to handle
Plus,
the
you made
defense.
a lot of good contacts.
Made a lot of good contacts.
Everyone, the agents all liked him, and so then when he started his practice, they would throw business his way, and it was the only way we could start out. As opposed to most of the guys that graduated from the U of C law school, were able to go, work for pennies in prestigious firms and move up that way.
Well, a number of them, their father or uncle or somebody was already a very prominent Chicago attorney.
And so you will hear about U of C law school graduates that are very high up in Washington.
I recall one member of my class was Jason Bellows. He was the son of Charles Bellows, a very famous criminal lawyer who was the brother of Bellows, the author.
Saul Bellows.
And the son of the professor was in my law class. They all had ways to start out into.
And your Professor Levy ended up being.
He became the Attorney General, but without context. Again, going back to where did I come from? Where did my parents come from?
And having to make a living for a family immediately. He only had one way to go, and that is to crash in on his own practice and bring home money. And that's the way we started.
You had to work longer hours and take all kinds of work that attorneys generally wouldn't even bother with, but everywhere you get a few dollars, you would accept the task. And then I had to start from scratch. I did get a lot of help from the first lawyer I worked with, was John Tiz. He helped me a great deal, and because he'd been in practice for quite a while.
He was very nice too.
You had to learn everything more or less on your own, but he advised me how to learn things. If you want to get the best complaint to file in a lawsuit, just go to the clerk's office, look up some of the most prominent attorneys' names on cases that have been filed, get their case out, copy it down, and you will have an identical complaint for your client. And I followed that bit of instruction, and I was able to prepare excellent complaints. And I had to file many, many lawsuits because insurance companies wouldn't be inclined to settle until you had actually filed a lawsuit. And so I was, and of course, the secretary, whoever she may have been at the time, would have to type page after page of these things, on a typewriter. It was a slow process. You kept the form of each case you had, so you could change the names and the amounts and the directions of the vehicles on the complaint. But it was a long process of trying to get a practice established. However, it was, in my case, it was very rewarding, primarily because I did work for State Farm, got the agents to help me get cases, got Attorney John Tiz to give me some very good pointers, and gradually
Well, what
it
you're
worked
saying
out.
is, again, we did what we had to do, which brings to mind my maple sewing machine from Sears, one of the first acquisitions we had. And I remember when you were going to start to college, and I called up Audrey Guy because Joe was going to be starting to college, and he said, Audrey, how are you going to do it? They had a pair of twins. They had a pair of twins. And I thought, well, if Audrey can do it, I can do it. And then I ran out, and because I already made Marcia's clothes and my clothes, and thought, well, if I could make Mike's clothes, we'll get along. And so I got a pattern for undershorts, boxer undershorts. First time I ever made any men's tailoring, and I did it, and that made me feel so good. That's all I needed was I can do it, and we did it. But we had this little house in Park Forest, and it was 2 small bedrooms, a living, dining, and tiny kitchen, just room enough to eat in, and it had a sink that had a shallow part and a deep part, and room next to the sink where you could put your washing machine, which I had a wringer washer, and I did the laundry, and all the girls around the neighborhood were getting dryers, and I said to Mike, I would really like to have a dryer, and a dryer to him was a clothesline that revolved. Because I had one strung up. Oh, this was going to be a dryer. Well, anyway, we got by, but then we were expecting Michael, and I guess Mike's mother thought, these people can't live in that house with another child.
Well,
And
before you get out of the dryer situation, that we had a lovely backyard and where the dryer was placed. I hauled carload after carload of flagstone from the Joliet quarries and built a beautiful
sunken patio.
sunken patio with a flagstone
And you and John
wall.
Teenstra, our State Farm agent, made a putting green out in the backyard.
And Grandpa Hinko made one of his very famous glider swings for the kids.
He always made a glider swing.
He made several of those.
Sandbox.
Sandbox. So we
but
made
then,
a little bit more out of it.
when I was expecting Michael, Grandma Hinko started looking for another house. And after he was born, I certainly was looking for another house. And I would put him in he had a car seat that had a steering wheel on it. And I'd put him in the car seat, and he would be sitting next to me steering this, and I'd go from place to place looking for a house that we could afford that would be large enough. And Mike was officing then on 103rd Street, right near where we had our first apartment when we were married. And so Grandma found a house right near the office for us. And she said, it's junky inside because a man and his son were living there after the mother had died, and it was just full of garbage and junk. But she said it's got good thick. Your mother was always looking for good foundations, double walled foundation, and beautiful woodwork, and an open staircase. And so again, we did what we had to do. They helped us with the down payment, and we got a garbage man to come and take away junk, and painted it and cleaned it, and we turned it into a lovely home. In fact, if social changes hadn't come along, we would have been very happy to stay there for the rest of our lives. But the neighborhood changed, and I was so afraid. I was very afraid of black people in those days. We all were in those days. We hadn't had any contact with them, and actually, the black people that came into our school were lovely, educated black people, but we were still afraid, and we thought we should move to the suburbs.
I think it was more the uh, way the children had to behave in association with them
Well,
that
the
changed.
value of the education
With
went
the-
down, with discipline, more
It was
discipline
getting
needed.
to be difficult for them to get an education under the circumstances that developed. The racial thing as such didn't bother us at all. In fact, it was a very amicable situation for Mom.
Well,
and
actually,
PTA.
Debbie was born in.
Debbie was born
Well, we
in,
lived in Park
in
Forest.
Park Forest.
That's what
That's
it
right.
was. I was pregnant with Deb, and Michael was
Yeah.
a toddler.
You
He
were.
was 17 months old when Deb
I was
born.
running for Congress when you were pregnant
Oh,
with
we went
Deborah.
through that election.
Oh, yeah.
Lord.
That's when we lived in Park Forest too. We
One little
when I
guy
decided
and
to-
pregnant with another one, and he decides to run for Congress. So again, we did what we had to do. We did it.
It was a great experience, a lot of work, and we learned an awful lot about politics. I wasn't successful, but I certainly put up a very, very good fight. The primary was a bitter, a factional thing.
Well, you were successful from the perspective that for a newcomer, they didn't even know your name. You certainly pulled a lot of votes.
During the primary, I had an opponent, and the intellectual crowd was sort of ganging up on me because they wanted their own candidate to be the only one in it. And when I was running and chosen by the Democratic Party to be the candidate, they were quite embittered. But we all worked hard, the whole family and all my friends and everyone worked hard during the primary. And I can recall one debate we had at our Park Forest auditorium, one of the schools, in which my opponent and I were debating. And he was so flustered. Someone asked him, if you are nominated, or if you're not nominated, one or the other, would you support the Democratic ticket? And he said, I'll support the Democratic ticket from Eisenhower all the way down. And Eisenhower was the Republican candidate for president, and he blew it there, and he was quite flustered. I beat him out in the primary very handily. And
Well,
then,
he was a brilliant man.
he was a brilliant man and always a friend of mine. He went on to be a judge. I never had any personal animosity toward him. I probably did toward the group that were working against me because they were using sinister motives and various things.
Well, they pretended they were working for Mike, and actually, I think I realized first that they were working against him, and then they came up with their own candidate suddenly.
The outcome was it was a very, very heavily Republican district in which the incumbent had the usual support from the Republican Party, plus being an incumbent, plus the actual makeup of the community was such that the chances were extremely slim, but the outcome was that he was quite frightened toward the end. If it hadn't been an Eisenhower landslide year, the chances of me beating him would have been excellent. However, almost the entire Democratic slate was swept out of office. I got, as I recall, about 104,000 votes to 132 or so for my opponent, which was, in that case, an extremely close election. And it was during the time that Eisenhower just swept the nation. And, I certainly felt that I did a good job in the campaign, and that I served the party well in my participation. and it was a good learning experience.
At,
Well, now we're
at what point did you actually stop working for State Farm and open your own practice? And was this before or after you ran for Congress?
I was working for State Farm for about 2 years. I started with them in 52, and I worked with them until 54. And they wouldn't allow you to practice law if you're working for them. So I was secretly officing with, I can't mention agents' names, but I officed with one agent sort of secretly, and then I moved into John Tiz's office on 75th, just off of Cottage Grove, and had my name put on the window. And I was still working for State Farm. This would be, about 1955, and they wanted me to take on a superintendent's position with State Farm. It was so easy to stay with State Farm because they were making it very comfortable financially and otherwise to stay with them. But I knew that if I did stay with them, I would never be able to do what I want to do as far as a law career. So I had to make my choice at that time to resign from my position and to go into the law practice. And I guess I had to rely on John Tiz at that time. I asked him, do you think I'll be able to make as much in practicing law as I am with State Farm? And he said, I think your first year you'll be making more in the law business than you are with State Farm. So I took his advice. I resigned and started to practice law. And I think the first year I just about made as much in my law practice as I was making with State Farm. So there was no great financial setback. And year after year it improved, and I began to get better and better cases, so that the law business was building up. But again, it was a matter of building up from base zero up to where I could make a comfortable living out of it.
Mike, do you remember when we still lived in Park Forest and you were secretly practicing law? And before he would leave for work in the morning, he had to have his cases typed up. And we'd have egg and bacon plates on the table and the typewriter at one end, and the baby's crying, and I'm out there typing up his things. That was the first order of business that had to be done.
It wasn't just smooth going and easy to start the practice. And once I was in the practice, there were times when things were not moving, and bills were always coming in. Now we had 4 children
And 2 cars.
Well, one car was free when I was working at State Farm, but of course after that I think we had 2 cars on our own because I was so far away from everything. I would almost plead and beg superintendents with insurance companies to settle cases for me when we had nothing whatsoever to face the next month's bills. So it still was a hard struggle, even though I was gradually getting better and better cases. Still, when costs went up and the cost of raising children went up. We had tough times for quite a number of years, even after I was into the law practice full time.
But I remember when we decided that we'd have to move to the suburbs and to get our kids out of that.
Can you hold just one moment? Dad, you want to pull down your shirt a little bit? Just pull it down. And then just pick it up from what you were going to say there, Mike.
From that neighborhood that was changing.
Start from the beginning of that thought.
I remember when we started thinking about moving to the suburbs to get away from the social changes in Rosemore, where our home was. I would, by now the children were all in school, and well, in fact, Mike and Deb at that time were getting pretty close to junior high, and I went out and I found this lot, and I was always looking for a lot that that was hilly and had water, and but the south suburbs are so flat and uh, and by this time now Mike was had his office in South Holland. Did you? Yes. Yeah, you did. And no, because I called you at your you were
67 now.
on 103rd Street still, and I called and I said, "You've just got to come out here. I've seen this place, and there isn't even a road to the lot yet, but it's just a kind of a lot I've been looking for." About that time, you had that quote unquote Ferris wheel case.
Oh yes, that was one of the best cases I had is when um, I had the client who was injured on a Ferris wheel accident where he had touched a high power line, and that case netted me a very good fee so that we could now start to look for a better home in the suburbs.
And I remember telling the painter while the home was being built, and he said, "Well, you're really moving up." He knew where we had been living. These were all Dutch. Our builder was a Dutch company, and these craftsmen were all Dutch, and he knew where we were coming from, and I said yes, and it only took one good law case to buy us this house, which was true. and and I thought, oh well, from here on in, these kind of settlements, we are really going to, But then we had years after that where they were very, very slender years.
Well, that's right. That case that I settled, actually, I was in association with that case with John J. Connelly, who's a very famous trial lawyer. I had prepared the case, and I had filed a lawsuit. I had done quite a bit of the deposition work, but it involved about 4 very large law firms. And when you're involved with a lot of law firms, then they try to run you to the ground with depositions and court appearances so that a person all alone is at a loss to try to keep up. And you have to keep up because you have to properly represent your client. So I had John Connelly associated with me on it. And just as it was going to trial, he was able to work out which at that time was the largest settlement ever awarded in a case in the circuit court. So it was a nice thing to get started with.
Can you remember any specific figures just to give us an idea, not just so much the settlement, but what you were paying, what did things cost then when you had 4 children and you had just moved into this place that you had to practically renovate, the house that you moved to after Park Forest?
Our first home in Park Forest cost $10,900, as I recall, on a contract. We sold it for $13,000, I think either $13,000 or $13,500. We moved into the Calumet Avenue home at 10448 Calumet, and that house cost, I think, $16,500. And from there, we built the home in Park Forest, which the contract.
No, South Holland.
Oh,
South Holland.
in South Holland, yes, we built the house in South Holland. The contract price was $58,900. But you see, by that time the house on Calumet is now paid for because of the income, and we had enough to put down on the house in South Holland, so it didn't make any great financial strain on us. And we designed a very lovely house, and we drove past it the other day. It's probably the nicest home in the whole
It's the
of
prettiest home in South
Holland.
But we sold our home in Rosemore to Mike's sister, and I guess your brother.
Yes, sister and brother
Yeah,
both.
because your parents had passed away by that time, and he lived with your sister, and we sold it to them for very little more than.
I guess exactly what we had in it or less.
Yeah,
It's no
we
problem.
didn't even charge them for. We had remodeled the upstairs for a dormitory for the girls, and Michael had his own room downstairs. And we had finished off the basement into a big rec room with a ping pong table and a big bar in it. And we sold it to them for exactly what we paid for it in the beginning because we felt we owed the family the money that Mike's parents had helped us out with.
You
And,
spent,
and all the time they had helped us out during Mike's years at school and so on.
you spent quite a few years in that house though, because you moved there when Mike was about 2 years old, something like that.
I think we lived there for 12 years.
Mike, well, we moved there in January. We moved to Calumet Avenue in January of 1957. I remember that, well, shortly after Debbie was born. She was born in January of 57. And she came there as a baby. So
I carried her there in a basket,
maybe February, March, or April. And we stayed in that home. In fact, that when I was running for Congress, Mike was big enough to help participate in the campaign. Some of the campaign pictures show me with Mike, and I think
we were in Park Forest at that
we were in
time.
Park Forest,
Yeah.
but Mike was old enough at
Oh,
that
about
time.
2 years old.
So he was participating in the campaign. We had a 1920 Dodge that a close friend of mine in the repair business had let us have, and I think his picture, Mike has his picture in that in that vehicle. So,
but in some of your campaign pictures, he was sitting on my lap. He was still a baby.
He was small. But we moved there in 57, maybe February, March, or April, and we stayed there until 1967 is when we moved to Park Forest.
Well, then to South Holland.
To South
So
Holland.
then it was only
yes.
10 years we were there.
About 10
So
years.
in those 10 years though, your children really were
Oh,
going
yeah,
through grammar school. How about some stories of life in that house before we move on to South Holland?
You know, I had one thought when I was mentioning remodeling that house. Michael was maybe just before kindergarten, I guess, and he wanted cowboy boots. He always called it cow boots. All the kids were getting cow boots, and he wanted cow boots. But he had a very wide foot, and we searched for cow boots for him, and we finally had to buy a longer size. So he walked around this little figure in these boots with toes that almost turned up because they were so long. But we had a carpenter in there doing the work, and Michael wanted tools too, so we got him a little saw and hammer set, and he did a lot of sawing around that house. And he had those cow boots on, and he would be sawing. We had multi-paned windows. It was a colonial house, and one day I caught him sawing one of those bars on those windows. He was doing a real neat job with his
Only
little
helping,
yes. Helping. He's always helping. He was so cute. And Mike and Deb, while we lived in that house, were preschoolers, and they only had two friends. The house was about probably 20 years old when we moved into it. I would imagine it was built just pre-war, and it was built so beautifully. But Mike and Deb had Kurt and Gary Abraham. They were the only two little kids on the block. Most of the children in that block were off to college, you see, from the original owners. And so they played outside with Kurt and Goggy. They called him Goggy. And Debbie, so she had to play right along with the boys. So she had her own guns and holster. And by this time, she's wearing the cow boots. And she's got a cute picture that we treasure where she's pushing her doll buggy, and she's got these cow boots on and her holster and her guns on. But they called themselves the Wees. Everything that they ever said, Michael would never say, or Debbie would never say, I did this or I did that. It was, we did it. So we called them the Wees. They were cute.
I think during that time, my parents had the cottage in Beverly
Oh,
Shores,
yeah,
and
yeah.
either they or Corky would pick them up and take them out there.
They loved that cottage, yeah.
So.
All the kids did. Oh, by this time now, Marcia's getting pretty close to high school age, and Sandy's in the upper grades and in the grammar school. So when we moved to Park Forest, I think I mean, to South Holland. I think Michael went right into junior high, and Deb was still in McKinley School. Yeah, I think that's how it was. And then, because that year that we took a trip to Europe and we took the children with, Mike and Deb with, I remember going over to the junior high school in Dalton and asking for Michael to be able to go away in May. We wanted to go in May, and they had to miss some school. And the teachers were, yeah, they're doing fine. They were always ahead of themselves in school, and we took them to Europe with us.
Were there any family vacations that you took when you were still in Rosemore, when the kids were younger? Do you remember what did you do for vacations then?
Most every spring, while we lived in, I'd say in Calumet, we would take what they used to be called cleanup week, last week of April. Well, that was spring vacation. We would take the spring vacation period to go down to Biloxi, Mississippi, because that's where I was stationed in basic training, and I loved it along the Gulf Coast at that point. We went there many years.
And by spring, it was still cold in Chicago, but warm down there, and they could go swimming and stuff.
And we'd always take a trip from Biloxi into New Orleans. We had each of the children's portrait painted by one of the artists in Pirates Alley. And the monkey and the organ grinder were there, and it was just lovely spring vacations. We did go to the Smoky Mountains numerous times because it was one of our favorite places. I guess we went up to Mackinac Island with the children. We were always traveling. It seemed like we always went somewhere.
One time I came home from the office and he had just settled a case. We called it Our Ship Came In. He was always waiting for a ship to come in, and a ship came in. It was just a small boat, but we could take a weekend in Florida. And I remember being up in the attic of that house in the trunks, dragging out the last summer's clothes for all of us. And I think in one evening we got ready, got on a plane, and flew to Florida, rented a convertible. We always lived it up when we had little money.
that trip was one where the Lockheed Electra, the prop jet, was just coming into use. And
because it was
Deborah must have been 2 or 3 years old, because she was maybe 3,
yeah.
And they had a model of the prop jet engine, and she was turning it, and her finger got pinched in the one model in the airport, and she said the prop jet bit her. And then,
there was
of
a
course,
family joke.
She was so active, she was running up and down the aisle of the airplane going to Florida.
Both of them.
So we said they ran all the way to Florida. On that trip, we stayed at a kind of nice family motel, had a nice swimming pool, and Kim was the lifeguard. And Debbie was little, and we just turned our head a second, and Debbie was in the pool, and as quickly as she was in the pool, Kim, the lifeguard, was in there, lifted her right out, and she was out. She was in and out of the pool so quickly, we didn't know that she had fallen.
So then we'd say, and she would talk real baby talk, and we'd say, and what happened at the motel? I fought in the pool. And who got you out? Kim. And that was we always made her tell that story.
Oh. But we enjoyed Florida. Mm-hmm. We'd go there a number of times.
And then we'd go to the Upper Peninsula to
Munising, Michigan.
At a resort.
We went to New York a number of times with the kids. I recall Mike being nutty about getting the tiny camera, those stores that have miniature camera. But there was always some place we were going, and everyone seemed to love to
And Michael
travel.
always collected knives. He started out with Jack knives and Boy Scout knife, and he had a real knife collection. By the time we lived in South Holland, I found, your Legion post was getting rid of a bass drum, and we had that fixed for a glass top coffee table for Mike to display his guns under the glass. When we went to Munising, Michigan, to the resort a couple of years, I guess we went there, and they had a wild rice business. The resort owners, the Indians were still reaping the rice, by canoe, and you could have. They had rice pancakes, and they had rice muffins. They had everything
Oh,
made
that
from.
was that was at Shing Walk in Aikens, Minnesota. That was.
Oh, that was in
Yeah.
Aikens, Minnesota.
And we went there a number of years in a
Yeah.
row.
And they found out, the kids found out, you could have all you could eat, and they really cleaned up on those rice pancakes and
Wild rice.
wild rice. Yeah, oh, they were delicious stuff. And they found out you could have as many desserts as you want, so they took advantage of that. And we always had good times. We had. We always had Pontiacs. We always bought Pontiacs, and the Pontiacs at that time could be described as a big boat, and the back seat was wide enough for the three girls, and Michael always had to be in between us and the front seat because he caused trouble. He says the girls caused the trouble, but we always said it was Michael causing the trouble. And Mike always packed himself a little cigar box full of crayons and so on and so forth. He always had spearmint gum in there. And one time he also put salami in there, and it was on the back shelf of the car, and crayons melted. And when we got done south, and he called, he wanted his cigar box to be forwarded up to the front seat where he was, and he opened it, and this odor from the mixture of melted crayons, salami, and spearmint gum was more than the girls could take.
Oh, at Biloxi, Mike loved to stop at Barris's. He'd go there all by himself and have some. I think
It was a seafood house.
Seafood house just down to the east of our motel. I think it was a Sun and Sand that we stayed in, and he would, I think, order himself a big platter of shrimp. So he loved to go there, and it was.
He paid
his
for it
favorite.
himself. He wasn't very old, was he?
No.
He walked down there by himself and ordered his shrimp, and then during the hurricane, I forget what year, that was all wiped out.
Camille, Hurricane Camille flattened the whole motel. All that was left was a maple leaf shaped pool.
In our memories.
And our memories, and they had an archway across the road that was demolished. It was sad to see because it was a very lovely experience we had a number of years at that place and at other spots along that Gulf Coast. It's a sparkling coastline, and it was great fun.
Your parents had a place on Lake Michigan, and you used to use that in the summer?
Our parents had a home in Beverly Shores. Well, they actually had two homes in Beverly Shores, right?
First
One-
they had one.
That
We all helped build it.
the first one was built.
Yeah, and
That's right.
but your dad added on,
Yes.
and we were always and you did the whole electrical. It had no electricity, and you put all the electricity in.
Yeah.
Remember?
And we both built the big stone barbecue in the
Mike and I.
backyard.
Yeah.
It was our idea, but it wasn't anyone else's idea. But we got our way, and we built a lovely outdoor barbecue. It was close to the beach, so we had a lot of fun going down to the beach all the time. And it was hard to get to because there was no road access, so we usually had to climb up the hill. And
Parked down below. And
parked below, but it's true, they had no electricity, and we had to start from scratch. We got a new, relatively good telephone pole from a lumber yard 10 miles away and hauled it on a trailer, dug a big hole and erected the pole. I think we were putting the pole up at night, and the aurora borealis was so bright that night. It was like it was coming from all sides, from the south and north and east and west, and kind of coming to a focus at the zenith. So it was beautiful. And in that area, we saw the aurora borealis on many occasions. But we put up the pole. I put up the meter box for the electric company to see. You have to have the meter box in. And wire from there all the way into the house. I wired the whole house, put the switch box inside, and when the fellow from the electric company came to hook it up, he said, "Oh, marvelous job." He didn't know who did it, but I had done it.
you were supposed to have a certified contractor.
But it was
But
all
we had
done.
at that time we had a Mr. Thomasma living next door to us, and he was an electrician, and so Mike just picked his brains, and Mr. Thomasma told him just how to do it, and he did.
Well, I had some
He had some
book or
books,
something
yeah.
that showed how to to follow specifications in order that it be certified. And then after they sold that cottage, then they bought the other one over
They bought the hill,
the
the whole
hill
hill.
that was formerly used by some Boy Scouts. They had an old shack on it, and my dad had a new concrete slab poured, and my dad did the concrete work, not the concrete, but the carpentry work. My brother Joe did the plumbing work. We all helped with putting it in a big septic tank, and I did, again, all the electrical work from the pole all the way into the house and the meters. So we all combined our efforts and had a very comfortable home, which the kids and many of our friends went time and time again. I remember one occasion we had our friends from South Holland all meet us there, and Michael had gone there just before that and put all the kerosene lanterns on so that when we arrived at the cottage, it would look like the most cozy, secluded spot in the world. We just had a lovely experience, and we had to have Mike make a race all the way to Beverly Shores just
We did all
just
these
to add
things
atmosphere.
to we did all these things to make things unique. We like to give unique parties.
The other day, Sandra took us for a ride along the beach, and when we went to Michigan City, and it's just a place we always loved and still love, and we were inclined to build something in that area, and we sometimes wish we did. Sometimes we're happy we didn't because we have a nice home in Florida, but we did have the desire to be in some natural setting, and that is one of the loveliest places we know of. It's in the dunes. And Shellberg Farm and Bailey's homestead are places we would visit, and Mike has memories of those. I think all in all, the kids loved the dunes as much as we did. So it was another one of our great experiences.
Where were you living when Marcia graduated from high school? She was pretty old by the time you got to South Holland, but she wasn't graduated from high school already, was she?
Marcia was already going to college at Lake Forest. She spent her first 2 years in college at Lake Forest, which was then a Presbyterian affiliated college, and we were Presbyterians by that time. And she was graduated from college. Sandra had 1 year left at Fenger High School, but I had graduated from, Marcia had graduated from, and now Sandra, we got out to South Holland, and she commuted back to Fenger High School so she could graduate from there. And then, of course, she went off to Northern Illinois University. She spent 2 years there while Mike and Deb were finishing high school in South Holland.
While Sandra was going to high school, she had certified as a lifeguard, but one of the bad experiences where we had a beautiful red convertible, and we were having a party at our house in South Holland.
We were having an open house we had just moved in and gotten settled.
Yeah, and Sandra was going off on a mission to pick up something, and she had a horrible accident right on 170th Street, just close to at the frontage road on 170th Street, and she suffered a very severe fracture of her leg, and this was
Totaled the car.
just as our guests were about to arrive.
Oh, it was a catered affair,
Yeah.
and we had, 80 people invited, all the people that Mike had been associated with in politics and in the law business, and all our new neighbors, and it was about 4 p.m, and I got a call from the police department, and they said, how did they put it? They didn't have an ambulance service at that
Bro's
time.
funeral home took her to the hospital.
The funeral, Bro's funeral home.
What
The
a
hearse
deal.
took her to the hospital.
That's how they ran
And
it.
we were so new there, I didn't even know where the hospital was. And they said, you just keep going west on 159th Street, and And I remember trying to find it, and I stopped off at a grocery store and asked for directions, and I was frantic. And I guess I had called you to meet us there.
Oh.
And I thoroughly thought they had taken her body there. And this was at 4 o'clock, and at about 6 o'clock, I guess, was the reception, and all the caterers were already there setting things up, and well, we had no alternative but to go on with the party.
Well, I think this was weekend or getting into a weekend, and
Yeah.
all the doctors could do was to put sandbags around her leg to keep her from moving it because they weren't going to perform
And
any
that she was
surgery
heavily sedated
until
and,
the next day.
because Dr. Elms, all the what do you call bone men,
Orthopedic
men
surgeons.
were gone for that weekend, and so the doctor said, well, she doesn't know she's here, and so we thought, well, we just have to go ahead with the party. But it was a horrible evening because we didn't want to tell our guests what had happened, and until they were just leaving, and then we told a couple of people, and they just couldn't understand how we could have gone through with it. Again, we did what we had to do.
Yeah, but it did turn out all right. Sandra had a large rod put into her one bone and another smaller one in another bone, and they stayed in for about 6 months or so. She finally had them removed. The reason that was brought up is because in her high school, she
You started telling about
she
it.
was on crutches for some ceremony that she was.
Well, it was going to be a water ballet, and so then the instructor said, well, she could be the announcer then on her crutches, which she did.
That's how I recall the
Yeah.
incident in
Yeah.
connection with that.
And she after that she never, well, she had a lifeguard certificate, and we had a neighborhood town pool, community pool, and she lifeguarded there one summer for a summer job, I remember. She's not a great swimmer anymore. I don't know.
No.
After all that.
Are there any other highlights of living in South Holland, of those years, things that, stories you want to tell about?
We had a nice neighborhood, and very socially inclined, and we were all moving in at about the same time. Houses were being built, the street was paved, and so as each new neighbor moved in, they were in one way or another included in the circle of neighbors, if you wanted to be. And so we started off with a bang with that big reception, and it evolved into a situation where each year each person was having repetitive parties. One were the 4th of July people, one would be the Memorial Day people, and so we had a real party neighborhood, and ours turned out to be a every year, I think in June.
No, it was around Christmas time. We would have the champagne breakfast.
I was thinking the Japanese parties.
Oh,
out in the
Japanese.
patio,
Okay. Yeah. Well, we weren't just one party.
No,
people.
we had 2 every year. We had a little
At
better.
least.
And 2 neighborhood parties, and our first one was the Japanese parties out in the patio, and so of course we had to do it up brown, and Mike went to the lumber yard and got panel doors, and the kids were all out in the garage sanding those darn panel doors. They were sick of that job, and then they varnished them, and then we put them on building blocks.
No,
we
short
got
legs.
we got short legs.
About one.
And
leg.
then I made cushions, I think, for 35 people, so that we could sit Japanese style and have our Japanese parties. And Mike would do all the teriyaki and the deep fat frying, and
We had our neighbor, Edward, brought over a flagpole and a Japanese flag.
yeah, he was in the advertising
So
business
we
or something.
put the flagpole in and a Japanese flag, and what did they sing?
They all sing,
Jose, can you see? Or I
no,
don't know.
oh, Saki, can you see? And they all came in dressed in costume. But we did that. If somebody was having a French party, they'd all get together and say we're going to wear berets, and we made a lot of dressing up, I guess. And that particular one year for the Japanese party, Bob Edborg hauled his wife Gerda over in a wheelbarrow, and she was, she had the white paint on her face. What do you call that?
Geisha girl.
Geisha girl. And she sat in the wheelbarrow holding a red rose. He came down the street. They would surprise us with these things, so we didn't know that. And Frank Sally bought a Japanese wig, and he dressed up like a geisha girl. So we started throwing his wig around, and we had hot towels in Japanese. They're called oshibori. They give you to wash your hands before you sit down to eat. Well, they were all seated around the table, and Michael's little girlfriend at that time, Beth Cameron, she was helping me, and she was going to have she boiled water, and she heated all those washcloths and passed them around to all the guests, and immediately they start throwing oshibori at one another. And the next morning, we had such a cleanup, didn't we?
Yeah.
We decorated the yard with a big fish made out of paper that we hung in a tree. We did things up real well. And then we had as you said, the champagne breakfast
For the Christmas season. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was year after year. Yeah. Partying was very, very nice in South Holland because we had such lovely neighbors.
And they
still
all had
keep
new
it.
homes.
Yeah.
They all wanted to use their homes and have fun in them.
And you took all the children to Europe? Did they all go with you?
When we went to Europe, only Deborah and Michael were available to go with us, and so they were the ones. We just took in all the capitals: London, Paris, Vienna,
Rome.
Rome, and Madrid. Took in the museums. It was a tour with American Express, so we got to see the highlights of most places. Sort of crowded in, but I enjoyed seeing those places. I hadn't been there before, and neither had the kids.
And the reason Mike and Deb were with is that Mike's parents had left each of the children a little, I don't know, $1,000 or something apiece when they passed away.
Well, the
And,
cottage was sold, and there was
and there was
about $3,000 for each of the
Yeah.
member of each of the 4 children. So that would be $3,000 for us, and we used that to give the kids.
they had a little settlement, each of the grandchildren, and we asked them what they would like to use that money for, and we said, you could go out and spend it on whatever you really want, records or whatever, but the thing that you're going to remember the longest is traveling. And I guess we really put the travel bug into them, because ever since our children have been gypsies, they really want to travel. So it was nice. The 4 of us went, and it was a memorable trip.
You were still living in that house then when Marcia and Sandra got married?
When Marcia was married, we were living in South Holland, because when Birch was born, Marcia came with Birch on Mother's Day as a surprise.
Oh, and I remember, the house in South Holland was being built when Marcia was planning to be married. And she wanted to be married the day before she got her college diploma. And we said, and she didn't want to walk down the aisle for her diploma. And we said, no, this is one thing that we want. We want you to graduate and be married the day after. They wanted one more day for their honeymoon, is what they wanted. I wanted her to wait until our house was carpeted and ready for a wedding, because we had the most beautiful open staircase with a balcony that ran around the 2-story hallway, and it would have been a lovely scene for a bride to walk down. But no, she wanted to be married in Washington, D.C., and her Parents-in-law to be lived in Falls Church, Virginia, and her mother, Glenn's mother, had she married Glenn Golden. Glenn's mother had never been a typical mother of the bride to arrange a whole wedding, so she took over. And Marcia, I came to Washington and I helped her pick out her dress she was going to be married in, which was a Mexican wedding gown. It was a short, lacy, tucked affair. And Glenn Golden's mother was named Glenn Golden also. And Glenn Golden took her to a milliner. They still had milliners in those days. And had a, I guess, what was the thing that you would, a Spanish girl would wear to, her veil would fall down over it. That sort of a cap anyway. And it was made to match the wedding dress exactly. So she had a beautiful, very small but very luxurious wedding in the, what's that district called? In
Georgetown.
Georgetown. And they were married in a tiny Episcopalian chapel, but a very wealthy little chapel. And then the restaurant where they're having the wedding breakfast was walking distance, so all the guests walked in a long procession to the restaurant, and then they went off on their honeymoon. Marcia loved our little dog, our little what are they?
Schnauzer.
Schnauzer, so well. Our Schnauzer's name was Pfeffer. He had a long pedigreed name, but we called him Pfeffy. And she insisted that Pfeffer come to her wedding. She knew he couldn't come to the ceremony, but he should ride out there with us. And so again, we still had these long, big Pontiacs, and there was a console that pulled down in the middle of the front seat, and all the way Pfeffer rode out to the wedding with his feet on the dashboard. We said he's riding shotgun, and we left him in the motel that we were staying at while we went to the ceremony.
Sandra was Marcia's
Sandra was Marcia's bridesmaid.
yeah.
Yeah.
And when Sandra was married, we were living in South Holland, and she was married at the Bond Chapel on the University of Chicago campus. And her reception was the first reception to be held at the Swedish Club, which had moved from 73rd and Ridgeland to the what was the Dorchester Club. And we had a gorgeous Swedish smorgasbord buffet dinner for our guests. There were over 300 that attended that occasion, but that's why where we lived in South Holland at that time.
And she married Daniel Tucker. He was from Kansas, and he was a friend of Sandra's cousin, Clay Van Kempma. And when he came to Chicago to work, Clay had given him Sandra's phone number, and so he called her, and they began to date, and they married. And he had an MBA, and so he was about 10 years her senior, maybe 15, I don't know. But he was established in business, and they had an apartment on Lincoln Park.
Okay, we're back up.
Okay, so maybe we should start with, whatever happened next, the next big event.
Well, in South Holland, Michael was going to Thornwood High School. Actually, Michael had the great experience of going to Thornwood, Thornridge, and Thornton High Schools, but he did graduate from Thornwood because simply it was in the process of being constructed. That's why it was a little delayed in
Thornridge was the newest.
Thornwood.
Thornwood was the newest high school.
He graduated high school, went on to Bradley University. Deborah graduated from Thornwood High School, and she went to University of Illinois for a while, and then on to two other colleges, no, three other colleges. From there, she went to the suburban college, South Suburban College, and then to Franconia College in New Hampshire, and from there she went to Sierra Nevada College at Lake Tahoe. Michael went from Bradley University to the University of California at Sacramento, and then from there he had his own experiences of travel. Worked for the post office for a while. Took a big tour through the Golden Triangle area. Trekked in the Himalayas. Exciting experiences that he kept us informed about and kept us worried about. He finally went to Governor State University, from which he graduated, and went into the television industry, and that is where he presently is located. Deborah, after graduating from Sierra Nevada, went to, I think she went
She
to,
came home, and by that time, we had sold our big home in Southtown, and we were living in a smaller, but still a large home, interim home, preparing to build on a lot that we had acquired in Indiana, near Valparaiso, called Shorewood Forest. Beautiful area. Deborah came home from Sierra Nevada with her diploma, and she just bugged us. She wanted to go back to California to live, and she finally broke us down. And I said, she had by this time a little Toyota, and she wanted to drive back to California by herself, which I wouldn't let her do. And so I said, well, you can go there if she wasn't going to be happy at home. I could see that. I have to drive back there with you. And we had our friends, the Birdiacs, whose son by that time lived out there, and she knew Brian from Illinois. And Brian will let you stay at his house until you get located. So that's what we did do, Deb and I.
well, she met Gary in California, and eventually both went to Florida, and from Florida they came back to Illinois, and she was married in the house on Kimbark Avenue by Reverend Akins. And then I think they both went to Florida again, where they owned the sailboat Havorn.
Which Michael knows about because
He had a very thrilling experience, which he can tell the world about if he wants to recall. And then Deborah and Gary they sold their boat in Key Biscayne to somebody with a big slash across his face, and he paid them cash, and they quick packed up before any incident might occur with the money they had, and they headed for California. They bought another boat, a West Sail boat, which was very lovely, and they lived on the boat in a couple places, Marina del Rey and then in Ventura. Then eventually they went their separate ways. Deborah came back to the Midwest and was divorced from Gary, and has found her way into working in the legal business as a secretary, and now she's spending her time primarily in writing scripts, and seems to be very content.
one of the things that you started to tell about our beautiful home in Southtown, our dream home. Incidentally, that was we had our 25th wedding anniversary when we moved in there, our silver wedding anniversary. Birch was born, and they lived in near Middleburg, Virginia, in Unison. No, they lived in. They had a little apartment in. Where they had that live?
Leesburg was the
Leesburg, yeah.
where they
And
first.
I went out for Birch's birth, and I was working by this time at Marshall Field and Company. When the kids grew up, I went to work. I felt I needed to be fulfilled, and I bought all Birch's nursery furniture at Fields and all his clothes, and then that Mother's Day when he was born in April, and that was May, Mother's Day. They all planned a surprise for me, and they brought Birch home. Deb and Dad went out to the airport. They gave me some excuse. They were going out looking for something, and all of a sudden they all appeared at my door with this my grandchild. And that was a wonderful, memorable surprise. And then they brought Birch home quite a bit after that. Sometimes Glenn would come with, and then sometimes towards the end of their marriage, Marcia and Birch would come along. And then we had some real nice times as a family. We bought a mobile home in Jupiter, Florida, and we spent some nice times there. We had our grandson and Marcia down there, and Deb, and I don't know if Michael ever went to that mobile home or not.
Oh, speaking of adventures, we had a tent trailer, and we took our children on a grand tour of the West through all
We had a
state
pop-up
parks,
trailer.
which was a terrific experience. We riding along Highway 1 on the Pacific Coast through Muir Woods, etc., and then coming back home through the desert area. Was extremely hot. We blew out a tire at nighttime on the trailer and had to try to find another one. The Salton Sea area was so hot in the Palm Desert area, our air conditioner had broken down. It squirted a leak, and we couldn't get it fixed. And so it was both the children were just about passing out. We had to go in what was known as a day sleeper place.
The mother was passing out.
We went to a motel and stayed through the day. I think we started out that next night, but there was a swimming pool which was too hot to swim in, and so but we cooled off in the room enough to get going again. And on our way back, we went to I believe Juarez, Mexico.
And there was the World's Fair in San Antonio.
The World's Fair was in San Antonio, and
we stopped there.
but that was a long tour, and in a sense, it was comfortable.
And the only other trip we took with that pop-up tent trailer, we took Mike and Deb at Christmas time to Key West to camp.
During the Christmas vacation.
During their Christmas vacation. And Michael had a battery-run television set, and they only wanted to stay in there and watch TV. I was so angry with them. When we got home, I put the trailer up for sale and sold it.
Imagine, in the middle of winter, it was freezing cold and snowing and drizzling and everything in Chicago. We go to Key West, to the beautiful area with 80-degree temperatures, and the two little darlings wanted to stay in the tent trailer watching television
I was
or reading.
so mad that I sold it.
Well, that's
took care of
something.
that.
They had what they wanted, and we did.
But we took a lot of nice trips together.
Okay, could you hold a second, Don? Would you go and put that wire back in his shirt there?
You mean this loop?
Nope.
No,
Guess
this.
Again.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, what should we continue on with, Michael?
Continue on with, you were going to talk about your lovely trips that you took with each other.
Oh, okay. Start out.
You started to say something about you had something.
We had some lovely trips together when the children got old enough to stay home alone, and or have their grandmother Hanson take care of them. And the first one was to Japan. I believe you were a commander of your
I
legion.
was the president of the Lions Club.
Oh, it was the Lions Club.
Lions Club convention.
That's what it was. And so we went with them to Japan and Hong Kong and
Taiwan.
Taiwan, yeah. and that was early on when women in Tokyo were the wealthy women were still dressed in kimono, extravagantly dressed in kimono, and that was a real wonderful time to go there. We really shouldn't have gone. We didn't have any money to go, but
What year was it?
what year was it?
Yeah, I believe it was probably around 1970.
Well, Michael and Deb were still in high school. I know that.
Well,
Yeah,
somewhere there.
but
But
that
it was one of the earlier times when you could visit Japan and still see Japan as it was historically known, with the the kimonos and the traditions, and the situation where the wives would not accompany the husbands to social affairs. They would get geisha girls, but that was our first trip to Japan, which was a very memorable thing. One of the most memorable things, we went through all these Japanese temples and shrines, and the various type of Oriental buildings, and then from there we went to Hong Kong. And when we flew from Japan to Hong Kong, when you're just approaching Hong Kong, it looks like you're coming into New York City, like an entirely different
right
civilization.
in the middle of the ocean. It was
Yeah.
such a shock to us.
Yeah. And from there we went to Taiwan and had a
That was when
tour of
when
Taipei and Taiwan.
when you couldn't get into mainland China.
We could get up to the fence where it separated. We were staying on the land side of Hong Kong, Kowloon, which was on the mainland side, and we took a tour up to the fence separating Hong Kong from mainland China, and you could look across what they called the red curtain, or the bamboo curtain, into China itself. But that's before there was any.
And that was
tourism
still
allowed.
when communism was such a scare to us, and it was our country really scared Americans about communism terribly. Russia was the big bear, and China was the dragon. It was a real scary thing to even look at. And then subsequently, we were able to go to China after President Nixon made the first overtures and opened it up, and we went there early on when old China was still like old China, and they weren't really even used to tourists, and we had to stay in whatever hotels that the Russians had come in there and built for them, old wooden structures, and it was kind of a hard tour, wasn't it?
It was, but it was extremely interesting. Of course, that's when we had a chance to go to the Great Wall, and but we had the experience of being in Peking, which is now Beijing, seeing all the people on their bicycles wearing face masks to keep the dust and the germs out of them. It was the middle of winter, I believe.
January.
But since then, things have changed so much that I think a tour of China, it gives you just a local experience. I suppose going to Chinatown in San Francisco is about as close
From
to
what we
going to China.
understand.
The other interesting trip we had was to go to the Middle East areas with a group from the Presbyterian Church. Several ministers from the Presbyterian churches in the south suburbs got together a tour. We at that time we started out. We went directly to Egypt, wasn't it?
To Cairo.
To Cairo.
Which was a real culture shock to us. Cairo airport was a melee of people running around. There was no law or order, and
Stacks and stacks of luggage, not knowing to whom it belonged. It's all there.
it was a terrible culture shock to us.
Finally, we were able to get out of the airport and onto a bus, and we were taken to a very nice motel right close to the pyramids. And we had a lovely stay there. From there, we went further south down the Nile to Etna and Edfu. We went to the Valley of the Kings where all the tombs are. Went into King Tut's tomb and Ramses' tomb.
in Karnak Temple.
Karnak Temple in Luxor. We took a felucca ride on the Nile.
Yeah, that was fun.
Then from there, we went to Amman, Jordan, and took a tour across the desert in Jordan to Petra, where you ride a horse through a very narrow opening, and you come into a beautiful carved out town that was one of the towns. I presume it was there, maybe 400 AD, somewhere in that area.
It was on the Silk Road, and it was a trade center. And they had carved the big buildings out of red sandstone, but they were just the faces of the buildings, except for a building they called the Treasury Building, where all the trade took place. And that was a real experience. And in Amman itself, we really didn't see a lot. We saw a museum, I believe, and then we had to cross into Israel, and that was an experience.
I think
Did we go across the Allenby
I think
Bridge?
the Allenby Bridge was closed, and there was a bridge right close by that we came into Israel through.
On a motor coach.
Yeah, and we were treated like cattle. It was very disappointing to know that these good Presbyterians from the United States are coming into Israel, and on board come these heavily armed Israelis with their machine guns and checking us all out.
They shoved us all
ushered us into cages, chicken wire cages.
It was terrible.
Examined all our luggage piece by piece. You had to take off your shoes. They x-rayed the shoes, checked your fountain pens, and I don't know what,
they even had,
maybe it was the wrong part of the Bible or something, but we sure didn't like the idea.
They even had strip booths, and they had the authority to to have you strip search. And of course, we didn't have to do that, but they kept us for so long.
I'll tell you, we were so hot coming in from the desert in Jordan that we were almost dehydrated.
Parched.
Dolores was under the weather, as she usually
dysentery all over the world.
But we certainly did not appreciate it. Finally, I think somebody gave somebody the word, this is nonsense. And so after about 3/4 of the complete examination of everybody, I think the last 1/4 were quickly whisked through, and we got on our way and got on the bus. And first thing they did was stop at some fruit stand or something that had fresh orange juice, and we were just so thrilled to have something that was cool and refreshing. And we were concerned about the water everywhere except in Israel. They said you could drink the water. We drank the water. Mother could get medication for her problem.
You could get over-the-counter drugs and
then we had
prescription drugs in Israel.
Great tour of all of the Holy Land.
We got to the River Jordan. Everyone hopped off the bus and jumped in, and their clothes, they were so hot.
Yeah, we got to see all the historic places, the Sea of Galilee. We had a dinner along the shore of the special fish that is found only in the Sea of Galilee. We saw the Golan Heights, the River Jordan, the Jacob's Well.
All the traditional places.
Bethlehem, the old city, the walled city of Jerusalem, where they have the markets. We could walk on top of the wall. We had an excellent guide who was very, very knowledgeable about
Israeli history,
archaeology and so forth. Great tour, but it gave us a new insight into religion. And our trip to Egypt did likewise, because you find all through the ages, you have the same concerns about people. Why are they here? Where are they going? What's the history of life?
We went through some ruins in Egypt that were down 3 different levels of humanity from I don't know how many thousands of years ago. And they had the same stories as in the New Testament. Noah and the ark, and it was all painted on the walls, and we began to question what we were being taught as Presbyterians, and I think it opened up a new religious era in our minds. And then we went on from there to Greece, and we just had a short time
in Athens.
which
We
was a nice experience.
stayed at the Herodian Hotel just below the Parthenon. We had a good experience. We finally got out to the beach after walking for hours and finally
We
taking
walked
a
all the
cab.
way to the beach,
We got to the beach.
to the shipping area.
Dining was lovely wherever we went. And that was the most educational tour I ever recall
I think
being
so,
on.
yeah.
Well, with the exception, I think Rome was very educational because of the history associated with it. But the Middle East and Egypt, we're talking about pyramids that are 5,000 years ago. You're concerned about something a year or two now, but it's when you know how long history's been going on, our little problems today are quite insignificant.
I think it expanded our consciousness considerably, and we ended up in Holland, where we left from Amsterdam. Amsterdam was a nice experience on the end of a trip. And then another memorable.
Well, the memorable thing about Amsterdam, we were walking down this street of shops. You stepped in where they had a slot machine. You put whatever coin was necessary and got about $25 worth back. And we quit.
And the man didn't like us at all. No.
And we took one of the ministers and his wife out for their anniversary to a very nice
What they call a
rice table.
Rice table. Was a wonderful meal. That was memorable. I think the most memorable trip you took was Dad had always promised Michael that he would. What it was is that each of our girls, we bought them a set of sterling silver flatware, full set, when they were married, and of course Michael didn't. And then he was to get my flatware. He was to be the recipient of my flatware, which was beautiful, extensive service for 12, and it was burglarized. So in lieu of that, Dad said that he would take him to. Michael wanted to go to Russia, where his paternal grandparents' roots were, and so you and Mike embarked on this trip to Russia, to Soviet Union.
We had a magnificent trip through most of the capitals, Moscow, Leningrad, Volgograd, which is now Stalingrad, or was Stalingrad now, well, one or the other. Then we went to Georgia, to Tbilisi, to Sochi on the Black Sea, to Kiev. Michael was so darn adventurous, he made me nervous and almost sick. He'd go out and associate with the youth, which we never knew whether the KGB was setting him up or not. And until he walked into the motel room at night, I didn't know if he'd ever come back. But I think he had a marvelous experience in that. And it was such a great experience after we told about it. Dolores said, well, that's for her. And so
I never wanted to go to the Soviet Union. They invited me to go with them, but I didn't have any inclination. I didn't like those people. We were so brainwashed in our country about communism. But when they came home with their stories, I said, I think I would really like to go there. But I didn't want to have Mike repeat the trip that he had already seen. So I investigated and I found this train tour to Siberia in connection with Moscow and Leningrad, which is again St. Petersburg, I understand. And so we had this 4-night, 3-day train trip through Siberia. We ended up in Irkutsk. We didn't go all the way to the Chinese border, but we went about, I would imagine, 3/4 of the way, and it was a marvelous experience. Oh, just something I would have always. I love trains, and I would have always dreamed of something like that. It was hardship in a way because there was only one bathroom on each car, and by the end of the 4 days, it was pretty rank, but just such a nice experience, and we got to see the Soviet people as they really were, the country people, and Irkutsk was a lovely little town, and what was the name of that lake that they took us to?
Lake Baikal, it's the deepest lake of fresh water in the world.
In the world. And they have a fish in there that's the only place you can get it, which we dined on one day. That was a wonderful experience.
And from there we went to Tashkent and Samarkand in the Uzbekistan province.
In the Arab section of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And
then to Leningrad, and
yeah, it was wonderful.
So, and since then we have gone to where? Well, first of all, we went to the Pyrenees a year ago in April.
That was a dream of mine for so many years, to go to the Pyrenees Mountains. It was just such a dream of mine, and to now that I'm trying to think of it, where we landed in Spain.
Barcelona.
Barcelona was a dream of mine because I was a great fan of Hemingway and his stories told about Barcelona and the bars that he hung out at. And I always loved the 20s period. That was really something that was embedded into my mind, because I got a little taste of when my parents were young and my mother had flapper clothes and they would go to speakeasies. Not a lot, but they had a little taste of that. And I learned how to do the Charleston when I was 4 years old, so this period that Hemingway writes about was so wonderful to me, and my dream was, like, always made my dreams come true.
Then again, we hardly get back, but Mother picks up a brochure and says that here's a nice tour of the Canadian Rockies, where I've always wanted to go, and I think we should go. So last fall we went to the Canadian Rockies, to all the fancy places.
It was a wonderful touring company. It was called Talk, Dauck. And now we're going again with the Talk tour because we enjoyed it so much. We're going again to Scandinavia so that I can find my roots.
So, we hardly got back from our Canadian Rockies tour when we signed up for Elder Hostel in Arizona in April of this year, and we spent 2 weeks or 3 weeks traveling throughout the West again and through all the historical sites.
We're now in our 49th year of marriage, and I guess our hard labors paid off in the end, didn't they?
Well,
we raised a nice family. We love our family.
At some point, I guess we passed over the time that you actually retired. Is there a date for that, and for actually going into retirement and moving to Florida?
Deciding to retire is usually a hard job for an attorney, but it wasn't that difficult for me. I was going to just slack off and just gradually stop taking cases and close the office. I already had an attorney who wanted to come in there if I left, and I was preparing everything to leave, and I didn't want to get involved in this being tied down with half-heartedly running an office, pretending like I was an attorney and not really being present. We were going to move to Florida. We're all set to do so and having a home built. And I didn't want to be commuting back and forth. I assigned as many cases as I could to some other attorney to handle. Those that I could finish up, I stuck with and finished up. And I was going to have a gradual move when Michael heard something on my answering machine and said, "Michael," his dad, "we're leaving, pack it up." And I don't know, we had a van or something. He packed everything up and we just moved out of the office. And that was the end of it. And I never regretted having to leave my office.
Well, what was the message on the answering
The
machine?
message was some sort of a death threat from somebody I didn't even know. And if it's somebody you don't know who to look for. And I wasn't concerned, but I guess Michael fortunately was concerned, because it gave me a very good reason not to hang around anymore.
Sandra and I went over there and unscrewed his name from the front of the building, and we didn't want this person to be able to find him at all. She said, it was a lady, and she said, "You put my husband in prison, and now I am going to take your life. You took my husband's life from him, and I'm going to take yours from you." So we got him out of there fast.
And I have no recollection of ever being involved with anybody that would have suffered because of me, so I don't know what to attribute it to, but I say thank goodness the threat came along and I got up and got out, and I have never had any regrets of finally leaving and taking the time to try to enjoy some years when I'm not under a constant strain of getting to the office. And that was part of the time when I was traveling down I-80 with trucks in all lanes coming in through your trunk and blasting their horn, and there's no place to go. You never knew if you'd get to the office or get home, and it was getting to be pretty rough. Also, the law profession was losing its respect and its dignity and its ethics, and I didn't care much to be a part of it anymore. What I thought it was going to be from the start was fading, and I felt that it wasn't giving me the satisfaction that I would hope to have from being in a profession. So I was happy to leave. No regrets, but I'm happy to be in a state of retirement now.
How old were you when you retired?
I retired, well, I closed the office at the end of August in 1967, so I was 67 and a half years old. I think it was long enough. I have been practicing law for 35 years, and I felt that it was long enough.
How many years has it been that you've been in Florida now?
Right after we closed the office, we were building our home in Florida, and we moved to Florida in the first couple days of January of 1988. And we're now into our 4th year in Florida. And we enjoy it immensely. We're having a wonderful time. We have marvelous neighbors, many places to go and things to do, visiting wherever we want, whenever we want. Sandra will be moving to Florida in Melbourne, and we'll have another person to associate with and visit. And, so it's been lovely, and gives us the kind of activities we like in our present state of health.
We had this lot that we spoke of in Shorewood near Valparaiso, and we built a contemporary home on that lot. We held on to the lot, I think, for about 7 years.
Yes.
And we were unable to sell our home in South Holland, and when we finally did, we moved into the Kimbark Avenue home in South Holland, and then we had to sell that, and so we were finally able to rent a home in St. John, Indiana, while we built our home in Shorewood Forest, and it was a contemporary home. We had always liked traditional homes before that, and this was very contemporary, built of cedar and glass. It was 40 feet wide, and it had 40-foot decks on 2 levels that went down to the lake that we were on, Lake Louise, big lake, a lot of boats on it, and it was a luxury place to live, and it was while we lived there, and Mike was commuting on I-80 both ways, and wondering every night whether he was going to get home or not with all the truck traffic that we decided to look in Florida, and I think we found a very nice spot in Florida. We like it a lot.
When you look back, do you think that you've achieved what you set out to achieve with your lives and with your marriage?
As far as I am concerned, I always feel, and not an anxiety, but a desire to keep doing something. So I can't ever say I have fulfilled my life goal. I would say I fulfilled my life dream in marriage with Dolores, but I would never want to be able to say, well, I'm all through, from here on it's nothing. I want to keep finding challenges, places to go, things to do, and I am very hopeful I'll aim at some new challenge that I can work toward and keep life as interesting as possible. We have traveled so much, I don't know if we'll take on a lot more traveling experiences, but I'm sure there's something we can do to meet some challenge, but I would think life would be very dull if we didn't have some constant goals to work toward and not sit back and said, well, we had a wonderful life and that is it. I never want to do that. I want to feel that my being created was meant for some great purpose, and I'll keep working towards some great purpose. And even when I accomplish that, I'll say there still must be something better and more important, and I'll keep working toward it in one way or another. That's my attitude toward life.
And what about you, Dolores? Do you...
For the period in which I was born and raised, I believe that I have achieved my goal, which we were brought up to understand was to marry and raise a family and have grandchildren and enjoy one's family. I educate my children, which I didn't have. Neither Mike nor I had that advantage. And what we did on our own when we were adults, and we wanted our children always to have something better than we had. And I guess I'd have to say, maybe all our values weren't the greatest, but for us, for the time we lived in, I think those were the values I wanted to achieve, and those are the values I achieve. I look back and sometimes I used to blame myself for maybe not having spent enough time with my children. And I used to have some misgivings until I finally told myself, well, for me, for the era that I lived in, I did the best I could for me, and I'm very happy the way my children turned out. And now we're surrounded by a loving family and one really wonderful grandson who's 19 now.
Also, one of our most prized recent possessions has been Michael's bride, Donna.
Yes,
Which is a
we do love
real
Donna.
lovely addition to our
Donna
family.
and Michael seem to be so suited. And,
so understanding.
So that's, as parents, I think we want to see our children settled and happy. And that's the main thing. And I think right now our children are basically happy and doing what they want to do. And maybe not what we want them to do, but what they want to do. And so I guess we can go off the face of this there saying, hallelujah, we did it. Right, Mike?
Well, I'll try to accomplish a lot more before then.
But aren't you going to say hallelujah?
I don't know. Okay.